everyone, welcome back to Life Unpotted. Today we're joined with our friend Cam Rosin. We've been following along Cam's journey on social media. I've been for the past year, and there's just something about your videos, Cam, that are just so inspiring. They always stop me in my tracks, honestly. Like, you have such elegant way of phrasing and discussing some of the most complex topics that we encounter in this life. And I think how you would categorize your work is neurophilosophy, which I think is so interesting because you have that nice combination of science with philosophy, because our brains and everything we're going on up here, our emotions determine how we react to the world. So I think that's so awesome. So we want to bring you on to just kind of chat about life, chat about some of the topics that you talk about, because we think it's kind of aligned with what we talk about here on Life Unpotted. So yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm stoked to be here. I've seen you in the zeitgeist for a long time, and I want to commend you on your conscious collaboration and your conscious like just networking capacity. Like I see you everywhere, which is fantastic. And it's like in all of these circles of people that are discussing these things. It's like this wave of non-duality, and all of the people that are questioning, trying to get deeper and deeper into that while still being able to function in society and a plane of existence where separation is kind of like baked into it. So we gotta roll with that. So just I love the questions that you ask and what you guys are doing, and I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome. For the episode, we're kind of thinking about what we want to talk about with you, right? Because there's infinite amount of things. And I think something that we've been talking a lot about in our personal lives and on the podcast is kind of the concept of just figuring out our purpose. What are we all doing here, right? What is our purpose in life? Do we have one? If we do, how do we figure that out? I know you're on a journey right now of navigating that with your career, kind of doing your own things. You have This Might Be Helpful podcast. You have a bunch of a big community that you're trying to grow, and you talk a lot about ikigai, which I know I'm not too familiar with, but I know it's a Japanese concept that kind of talks about your reason of being. So I guess maybe the first question we can start off with, Cam, is kind of like, how do you think that one should navigate thinking about their purpose in this life?
Purpose is one of those things where it's like if we're looking directly at purpose as this thing that we need, as this thing that we want, or as this thing that we're missing, similarly to happiness, purpose is kind of something that emerges from the conditions. And so, like, instead of looking right at it's like, how can I engage in things that might allow purpose to emerge from that? Because, like, purpose, happiness, joy, contentment, peace, these are emergent states that are coming from the conditions that support them. And purpose is something that reveals itself when those conditions are appropriate. How do we build those conditions? I think exploring curiosity with heartfelt tenacity for no other, expectation that this is going to be my purpose, but with the idea or knowing that through that process of questioning and creating and turning questions into creations and actions, we figure out more of what makes us feel good. Even the notion of purpose as something that is missing, working with what we have already rather than what we perceive to not be having. How can we start with where we are? And even going back to the Hindu concept of dharma, like dharma being this essence that supports life from within. What is my dharma? Is my dharma to save? Is my dharma to heal? Is my dharma to grow and create and expand and innovate? What is that dharma? What lights me up? And then how can I align my curiosity and my actions with that? And also knowing that purpose is, if we latch onto purpose and try and define it and hold it still, it, like everything else, is subject to flux and change. And so maybe that purpose is change. Maybe that purpose is the collection of experiences. Whether we're looking at it from like a neurobiological perspective, this brain just wants to expand and take things in. It wants experiences and sensations and stimuli and new horizons. So that, for me, a lot of purpose comes from just that exploration.
There's a lot there, and my brain is trying to regurgitate that and sum it up into what you just said. And it kind of seems like your purpose is engaging with your current environment, because that will help lead you to wherever the environment that will foster that purpose is. And you might not be in it right now, but that was what I took away from that. And that's been my experience with that, of kind of what we were talking about before we hopped on the podcast, was sometimes figuring things out means stalling out. And that might simply just be because like your environment isn't where it needs to be to cultivate your feeling of purpose or whatever that is. It's more so the importance is on the engagement with your current environment, because that is the momentum that is always going to build the inertia that's going to lead you to a place. And I'm really just talking to myself, but that was my interpretation of that, and I just think that was really beautifully said. And as far as the dharmas go, that's something that I feel like is more of your expertise or your interest. I haven't learned too much more about. I'm not too familiar with that, but I'd be so curious to see where that plays into it, if you think that that's something that is more theoretical to help give a language to describe purposes, if it's like like you said, it's like not to put something into a box, but more so to help describe what your purpose is.
It's like, what is my nature? Like dharma is nature, and there's an old
Hmm.
Hindu story. I think I read it in the Bhagavad Gita. Maybe not though. But an old holy man is sitting by the banks of the Ganga River, and there's a scorpion flailing about in the water. And the scorpion shouldn't be in the water, so the man reaches out, picks it up, and saves it. And the scorpion stings him. And a few minutes later, he notices a scorpion in the water again, and it's flailing about, and he saves it, and the scorpion stings him. And this goes to happen for a third time, and before he saves the scorpion, someone comes over and says, "What are you doing, man? The scorpion's just going to sting you again." And the holy man says, "It is the scorpion's dharma to sting. It is my dharma to save." And so it's like we find that even our nature can hurt us, but it's still our nature. And we, through aligning with that nature, not fighting it, can install a sense of purpose, even if it looks wrong to the rest of the world.
Yeah, that terminology of nature is really fascinating, because it's got kind of like that almost feels like westernized, of like everyone can kind of understand like, oh, like it was always my nature to be X, Y, and Z since I was a kid. So it's like, again, like kind of like tuning into even becoming aware of like what your nature is.
Because a lot of these words, they don't have any direct Western translations. And even like I'm reading the Bhagavad Gita again, interpreted by a different person, and in the intro he's saying there are lots of words in this book, in this Hindu scripture, that literally have no meaning anywhere else. Like I cannot tell you what they mean. I can try and give it a shot, but these words, they they are different regions, different dimensions of reality, that because we don't have the vernacular to describe it from our end, it is difficult to wrap our heads around it, especially because Eastern, or like Hinduism, Buddhism, those philosophies, those religions, those spiritualities, they began as unity, as non-duality, whereas with the Western interpretation, it's we begin in separation and then try and merge back into some kind of unity. And so like the language that we use to describe this experience, they're starting from two completely different qualities of experience.
I think that point in general is just so interesting when we try to put words to our experience. I've thought a lot about this just in terms of purpose, in terms of existing, in terms of being alive, that the English language, which is the language I speak, is composed of words, right? Words are concepts that derive from origination through our history. We have different languages, different concepts. Whenever you are identifying with a concept, there is a level of it that our deep knowing, inherent knowing, is not necessarily something that can be represented through concepts. We can't necessarily explain ourselves through words. We can't explain these feelings we experience, who we are, what we are, through very limited languages that have barriers. And I think it's interesting when talking about purpose, it's something that purpose is maybe not something we tangibly can see that's happening, or maybe it's something we can tangibly experience, or we can tangibly tie to a certain thing that's happening in our life. Maybe it's something deeper. And I think what we talk about a lot on the podcast, it's kind of like, and you talked about your nature, right? I think we all have this base state nature of love, of joy, of being, connected with this parts of ourselves. But through our lives, this nature gets clouded with societal expectations of you, your family's expectations of you, what somebody says to you when you're younger, and all these things start to build these layers and layers on top of layers of who you think you are. And when we're talking about connecting to, sometimes our purpose is just the nature in which we are experiencing the world. But what happens when you are so disconnected from that nature? What happens if you are living so far away from who you are? And the only way to kind of get on that journey to understanding your purpose is to peel back those layers, to ask yourself and connect with, what is really my true nature? What can I do to connect with that? Because I am now living in a state of reactivity. I am living in a state of anger. I'm living in a state of pain. I wake up every morning and I just don't feel good. And I think when you're going through life like that, when you have all these layers, it can really hard to even think about what is my purpose, because you are so disconnected from your nature.
And I think that, when we ask those questions, those big, kind of unanswerable questions, unresolvable questions, like if we were to ask, who am I? What am I? If we're asking it in that state, then we get conceptual answers, we get conceptual definitions and descriptions, and rarely are we happy with the answers that we receive. So we keep asking the question. Like, we're never going to receive an answer that goes, that fit like a glove. That describes everything. That makes everything make sense. And especially like considering the vantage point from which we are asking questions. Like if we're really low and we don't feel good and we ask, who am I? It's like this desperate scream, like, who am I? What am I here to do? But then if we, for a moment, park that question and start to flow into, what are the conditions that make me feel good? Like how can I wake up feeling good? How can I wake up feeling alive? Because when we do feel like that, when we feel good, we don't often ask ourselves, who am I? What am I here to do? Because we're too busy being. Like the thought doesn't come in. We have these infinitely complex questions and systems, and if we're living all of those out only through the mind, then we rarely come to a destination. We rarely come to a place of like, oh, okay, I can roll with this. It's just a series of unfolding what ifs and what the hecks. But if we like go radically simple and just look at, how can I make myself feel good today? Like the philosopher Rumi spoke about this idea of every morning you wake up and you have a different guest greeting you in your home. Sometimes that guest is anger, sometimes that guest is sadness, sometimes it's frustration, sometimes it's anxiety, sometimes it's joy. But how are you going to greet that guest? Because you don't want them to take over the house. How are you going to be a good host? What can you do to make that guest feel at home? And so when we wake up in those states, how can we engage in things that recalibrate and reorient and rejuvenate, so that by the time we walk into our day, those existential woes or questions are less looming over our mind and more kind of gone into the background, just passively thinking, passively wondering about how all of this relates and connects to us. It's like coming back into the body. I am the body. Going up into the mind, I am infinite and confused.
That is such a good way of putting it, because it was one of those mornings for me when I woke up today where I was like, something's just not right. And I was like, what? Like, I was like, oh, what I could do, I could go and get some caffeine. I could try to force myself to feel great. And later in the day, know that I'm just going to is all going to come tumbling down. The caffeine high will be away and I won't feel like feeling good. I'll crash. And what I realized is kind of what you just said, like there's going to be different visitors in the house. And what I think is something that you have to do is you have to welcome, no matter what it is, those visitors are, whatever the feeling is. It's like, okay, well, you're here. And then before you know it, it's in the back of your mind and you're just existing. And it's such a powerful and simple, but often looked over option for dealing with discomfort, uncomfortable emotions all the time, because no one in their right mind is going to wake up feeling joyful every morning. And for some reason, I kind of think we think that we should. You wake up, you have your caffeine, you have a dopamine hit right away, and then you expect to keep that all day long. Like, I think it's one of those things where it's like it's always in flux and you're not always going to have that really good hit right when you wake up. You might have to do uncomfortable things to get that hit more naturally. I'm not heating on coffee first thing in the morning, but from personal experience, I know that it can be a cop out for dealing with why you're not feeling great.
Big time. I mean, I love coffee. Big fan. But also, one of the things that I do for myself is like I delay those stimulants for at least an hour, because if I delay it, then all of the adenosine, which is a little sleepy digestive enzyme, washes out of my body. It gets cleared when you generate heat from within. So it's like if we wake up and have a hot shower, that is not it. Heat got to come from within, and that helps to clear away that adenosine. Whereas if we have caffeine really early, it binds to those adenosine receptors, and so the adenosine is just floating around in the body, so that when the caffeine wears off in the afternoon, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, then the adenosine binds to those receptors and starts breaking down, and that's when we get that like comatose 2 p.m. feeling where we're getting sleepy, but also there's cortisol and we're anxious. And so it's like you're in this limbic state halfway between life and death. And like, this isn't how I want my day to go. And part of that as well is like really honoring the transitions in our days. Like, it's really easy to want to keep the dopaminergic state going, that I want to feel motivated. I want to feel excited about life. I want to feel really engaged and involved with what I'm doing. But biology doesn't want me to keep stacking dopamine like that. And I will be borrowing from tomorrow at some point if I keep going beyond that. And so when I hit that 2 p.m. marker, that's usually when I become reclusive. I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to answer a phone call. Thinking about the amount of unread messages and people that I haven't replied to right now makes me almost physically ill. So I have to honor that there are parts of me that don't want that want to be enough for everybody, but it's not possible. And then honoring that transition by doing things that make me feel good again. So it's like a yoga nidra or my meditation or a walk or a swim, just something. Maybe I'll wrap a blanket around my shoulders and just like sit for a little while with my eyes closed. Just something to say, hey, I get that times are changing. They do this every day. So we'll sit here for a little while until you feel okay.
Totally. I think what I kind of want to ask you, Cam, and something I was thinking about as you were saying that is, how we have to honor our feeling states, right? We have to not force feelings when we aren't feeling good. We have to accept that. We can't always want to feel good. But I guess my question is for you. And I remember I've seen a lot of your videos. Looks like you've lived in nature, scenic places for a while. You can let me know if that's correct. But I guess my comment is kind of like, so we live in New York City, right? And this living in a city is very much geared towards fast pace, constantly moving. When you're working at a job, when you're in an office space, when you're operating in a world that requires a lot of you, when you are in a job that you are going to get calls at 5 p.m., you're going to get calls at 7 p.m. I've had a lot of moments where I'm just like, if only I lived, in nature, if only I lived around trees all the time. And then we've had moments where we recently went to Joshua Tree and we got the Joshua Tree and I was just like miserable. Like I didn't feel good. So it is those moments that make clear more than anything that your environment doesn't necessarily change your inner world. But I guess I want to ask you from your experience living where you live. I know you live in Australia and you can let us know like more specifically what your environment looks like. To what extent does this work get easier when your environment is more conducive to being able to accept your states? And environment can mean what kind of career you're in, where do you live, who do you live with. So I think I'm always thinking about like how much does environment really play a role?
I think it plays a really big role. There was a podcast episode that I highly recommend Huberman Lab with Dr. Alia Crum, and she's a doctor of psychology, and they studied mindset. And some of the interesting points that came up from that were also just how our mindset relates to our environment. So everything being a combined effect of what we do and what we think about what we're doing, how we feel and what we think about how we're feeling, where we are and what we think about where we are. And so knowing that we are constantly in that shifting dynamic between what we sense and how we perceive what we sense, that means that, like, going into moments like that Joshua tree, and, like, when we have expectations like this will fix it, I'll feel better when I go outside, and then you go outside and it's like, shit, dang it, I'm still grumpy, I'm still miserable, what the heck's going on right now? And so it's like, then in those states, in those places, cultivating the conditions to allow those more positive states to reveal themselves, to emerge. And it's not going into it with the expectation, because I do that frequently as well. It's like, all right, I'll go to yoga and I'll meditate afterwards, and that will set me up for a perfect day. And often it will, but nothing lasts forever, and I'm still very subject to change, and everything can influence me. I think that where you live is one of the most important decisions you could ever make. It When I was living in down south in Australia, in Victoria, I was in still a kind of small beach town. There's nature there, but it's not the kind of grandiosity of nature that I'm kind of attracted to. But I found that in that place, um, my business productivity was very high, because I was surrounded by hustlers and movers and groovers, and um, just the context of that environment led to me working a lot and doing a lot of work and being really happy with that, but also feeling like there was something missing. And then maybe 6 months ago, I did a pretty radical move up to the other side of the country, up in far north Queensland, which is like the Great Barrier Reef and the Daintree Rainforest. And it's like the oldest rainforest in the world, 180 million years old. And that connection to just raw presence of nature, that raw expression of reality, has led to me feeling really deeply connected physically and spiritually, emotionally, but also less effective in my capitalistic productivity sense than I've ever been. But also being able to accept that, because I value different things depending on where I am. In Montana, I just want to be on the river all day long. I don't really care about anything else other than being on the river, in the water, fly fishing, rafting, kayaking, guiding, whatever it is. I don't think about anything else, and I really change as as a human being. My disposition, my character, the way that I interact with the world, that's constantly changing. And, like, going back to that question of who am I, what am I here to do? Who am I is something that changes and evolves and comes up to meet me as the environment and the context of that environment shifts and changes. And then what am I here to do? I'm here to be wherever I am. And if I can really come back to that and simplify reality down to those core essence of just being, and also being in a place where I want to be there. They say be where you are, be where your feet are. Like, sometimes where your feet are kind of sucks. It's like we want to go do something else, and we don't need to put everything into this state of universal acceptance, go with the flow. Sometimes that fire of, like, no, I'm done with this, let's go. That's what led me to move. I'm like, I'm over this. Let's go try something else out. I don't know what it's going to look like, how it's going to work, but I know that it will in its own way. I don't know if that answered anybody's question. So,
No, it gave me a lot of questions and a lot of thoughts. Well, it made me think of kind of couple of things, because I feel like when you look at the whole idea of changing your environment alone, the black and white version of it, like, it's not going to fix your mind. It's not going to fix how you are. Like, that is true, but sometimes some places are going to negatively impact you, even if you are mentally working on accepting it. Maybe another environment is better for you, and you can have that awareness while still realizing that, I know it's not going to fix everything, but the reality is that your environment has a big impact on you. And I feel like Sophie and I have gone back and forth, I don't know, on the podcast or just in life, talking about this topic a lot, because I feel like there used to be this whole idea of, like, wanderlust, like, oh, that's going to make everything better just by changing my environment, like getting all of my dopamine from outside of me. Um, and I feel like it kind of gave that negative connotation to like changing your environment to improve your life, because it was just all just one sided. But I think, yeah, like exactly what you're saying. It's like nothing is one sided like that. But changing your environment, like Sophie and I live in New York City, and we're moving to Austin, Texas, which is, for not US listeners, very south in the US. So it's entirely different climate, culture, everything is totally different about it. Austin, Texas from New York City. And we've been talking about this forever, and we're just at a point where we're like, we don't know how it's going to work out. We don't know what we're going to do. We're going to be jobless in some ways, and we're going to be, going to be a lot of question marks. But in a lot of ways, like you said, honoring the transition. Sometimes if you stay somewhere for too long that you know that you're not, like, there's no growth happening, and there's too much familiarity. And like, I think to an extent, when you have too much familiarity, it's like that can hold you back. Like, you have to know, you have to be able to put yourself in these new environments in order, if you are having that opportunity. But it can really catapult you forward, because you don't know yourself. Like you said, like when you go to Montana, like you're almost like a different person because you just want to be on the water. It's like when you have been in one environment for so long, that's the only environment you know. That's how you know yourself. So you don't know yourself in other environments. So you have to move around to different environments to
I,
see what kind of person you are in those environments. And I think that's really interesting. Really interesting.
that disruption causes innovation. We are just this walking bundle of patterns, and we've got little 5% top down to try and influence and shape and change the trajectory of this experience. And one of the best ways to do that is to just disrupt the historical triggers for those patterns. You go to a new place and you can be a new person. Like, you can shapeshift. We are shapeshifters. And going into that place with intention as well, like, it's not the expectation that this will fix things, but the intention that, like, all right, cool, let's connect, let's grow, let's expand, let's see. Just maybe, everything maybe.
So it's just kind of like, it feels like to an extent, it's almost like, is our purpose in this life to constantly reinvent ourselves and to experience discomfort so that we can continue to grow? I think for many years of my life, until 2 years ago or so, I was living in a state of complete familiarity, complete comfort. I was thinking about life very linear, fixed path. And it's interesting because I think from there, purpose felt very clear. It was, I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to move up, be a partner, have this life, move to the suburbs, have a house, get married. And there was so much comfort in that. There really was. And I think now, as I'm deviating from that, you start to recognize that, like, there you can get, when you're changing your life and you're shifting and you're entering into new fields and new environments and new territories that you've never embarked in before. The discomfort is unavoidable, and the discomfort can be extremely, extremely uncomfortable. And I think, like we're talking about right now, the importance of shifting your life, of moving into new scenarios, moving cities, moving jobs. And perhaps you can talk a little bit about this in terms of like a like our brain sense. But from my own life, I understand that we want comfort because comfort is familiar. The question is, how do you get to the point to do something that scares the shit out of you, to then enter into this new point of life, to start growing, to start learning about yourself, to enter perhaps a new version of yourself, when the alternative where you are now just feels a lot safer? How do you recognize that the fear that's coming up for you, all that is the fear of change, when in reality, the other side of it really holds so much growth? And maybe growth is what we all want, because growth leads to fulfillment.
Mm, Great question. Back to, the idea of conditions. Conditions being these properties that almost are, patterns, and then when similar patterns connect, they allow things to emerge. It's like you have a healthy bed of soil has the patterns that allow life to emerge. Unhealthy soil will not. And so, what are the conditions that might allow us to take that leap to engage in that disruption? Almost like taking the notion of free will out of it a little bit, and understanding that all of our decisions are the this neurobiological sum of this complex. Just because they decide to change, they change because something pushes them to that brink. We think that, oh yeah, I finally decided to do this. It's like, no, that was the only thing you could have done at that point. It's like, oh, I wish I never had done that. It's like, well, you did, because there was no other way. It happened. It's been the conditions, these infinite conditions, these conditions that began at the Big Bang, are subtly shifting and moving our lives. And we have this notion of like, oh, well, maybe I'll go to the store, or maybe I'll quit my job, or maybe I'll pick up a new hobby. But it's like the body of conditions are what allow us to finally do that thing. And sometimes that condition is coming across a video on social media. Sometimes that condition is just somebody giving you permission, being like, yo, I give you permission to ponder the possibility of what life could be. I give you permission to not know where it is that you're going or what it is that you're doing. I give you permission to ask the questions, to engage in the curiosity, to make mistakes, and really like love the fact that you are trying anything at all. Because the last thing that I want for anybody is to just get to the end of their life and just look back and just see a series of what ifs that were never actually answered, that were never actually turned into an action. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but it's like fear isn't going to go away. The fear is honestly it's the calling, because on the other side of that fear is wonder. And if we're waiting for confidence before we do it, then we'll never do it. But we can just decide to be ready, because being ready is just accepting that I don't know, but I know that I will respond to the best of my abilities to whatever emerges. And like coming back to that readiness, this inherent state of preparation, this ability to adapt to whatever comes up, that is one of the most powerful things that anybody could recognize, because it means that you can go into something just through the first question without any further justification. Like, well, why are you moving interstate? Because I want to. If we have more justifications on top of that, then it's almost like we're trying to convince ourselves, or we're trying to convince the selves that have been told that we need to justify everything and that everything needs to have a purpose. It's like maybe the purpose is just to ask.
It feels like no matter what you're
Hmm.
doing, your brain's going to tell you when you're doing something that's right, your brain's going to tell you that you're doing something that's wrong. When you're doing something wrong, your brain's going to tell you that you're doing something wrong. So in a way, like you have to get comfortable with your brain telling you that you're doing something wrong and just saying, you might be wrong, brain. You might be wrong. And just continuing to, because like you said, at the end of your life, you don't want to look back and say, well, I could have done that. I could have done that. And ultimately, I feel like we always talk about how life, I mean, we're still kind of young, but how life is long, and how in this traditional sense, we're told to, at least what we've seen from our past generations, you get a job, you stay at that job, you have a kid, you get married, you have a kid, you have a family, then you die. And it's kind of like, I feel like when your life, you kind of know how it's going to be planned out, it it
Ugh.
becomes so boring, mundane, and it just kind of, there's no excitement. Like it feels short in that way. When you sum it up into four parts of your life is four parts. Okay, you're living the first one, you have three more parts, something like that. And something that we've been talking about recently as we're pivoting our life entirely is, well, life is long. If I take a step now, at least I'm taking a step in the direction. Maybe it's not the right direction, but at least I'm taking that step, because it's going to take me somewhere that I'm not right now. And I don't want to be where I am right now. And like what you said, it's
Mm.
so important all the time to remember is that taking action, something along the lines of taking action, you should just accept that you don't have everything that you need in front of you in order to take that action, and you never are going to have everything. So it's better to take that action knowing that you might be partially ready, because it's going to lead you to the next place that's not right now. And
Mhm.
I think that's like kind of one of the keys of life, and it's uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable. But it comes to a point like being comfortable can be suffocating. Like, and I think that's kind of like what I'm kind of rambling, but I think that's what kind of like the whole midlife crisis. It's like your life has been comfortable, like the traditional midlife crisis. Like your life has
Mm.
been comfortable for so long that you're starting to be like, what now? Like, what's next? And I think when you kind of get to that place in your 20s, 30s, wherever it is, you can have that midlife crisis at any age. once you become aware of the matrix or whatever you want to call it, that you don't have to be a part of it. And I think that's the most freeing thing. That's my soliloquy.
Mm.
Soliloquy.
Oh, I don't know how to say that word. Good job. It's so true though. Like that, it scares the shit out of me to consider the idea that getting to a point where you look back and go, oh no, I was so comfortable and I don't have very much time left. Like that repetitive life of the job, to pay for the car, to drive to the job, to go home, that you only sleep in, and you watch some TV, argue with your partner, go to bed, repeat it. Mm-mm. No, the steps reveal themselves as they're taken. And it's like we take this like step off the brink, the step into the unknown, but our foot lands. It always lands. The foot lands on something. And it's like recognizing that sometimes balance and figuring out your way in the world is less trying to organize everything perfectly and control everything, and more just trusting that when you place your foot down, there will be terrain that comes up to meet that. And that terrain will help inform the next step and the next step. And you don't know how they're going to land or where they're going to land, but as long as you keep stepping, they will. You will move. You will grow. It's the inaction and inertia that occurs when we're too afraid to move because it's got to be the right step. Every step is the right step. And you're not going to know as well if something was the right step until it's happened and you can reflect on it in hindsight. And even then, that hindsight is a matter of perspective.
Yeah. Wow. And it's what I hear from that is that failure is an illusion because no, you can never step and not have your foot's not going to ever not land. Your foot will always land. So we come up with these ideas so fixed in our mind that our foot won't land and we'll be stuck and our whole life will be ruined. And I've thought a lot about this past year, and one thing I've really actually recognized in the past 3 months and really concretely really have understood is that I didn't trust myself most of my life. I didn't know what it meant to really truly believe in myself, in that whatever happens, I will be able to handle it. I will be able to be okay. If I move to another city and I absolutely hate it, well, you pack up your bags and you get going, and then there ergo the process of your foot just lands in the next place, right? So it's just so interesting that, do you think it's societal, this idea that we have started to believe that if we change our life, if we do something radically different than what we've doing before, and it doesn't quote unquote go the way we
Mm.
want it to go, then we are now failing, and when our life is ruined? Where does this come from? And I don't think we're born like that. When you look at yourself as a kid and you're running around and you're eating dirt and you're going, I used to ride my bike standing on my seat without a helmet, complete disregard for any sort of fear. I think, when does fear become, is fear learned? Is it driven by our experience? I mean, obviously evolutionary have fear, but when does it become disproportionate? And when does it go beyond our evolutionary purpose to protect us and then turn into something that's actually hurting us?
That is such a good question. The cascade of excitatory chemicals that are released if we get a negative text or a direct debit fails or we realize that we haven't replied to those people is similar to the flow of chemicals that we might have experienced when we were faced with a predator. Like we have these primordial brains that are built to respond and to react to whatever we perceive as a threat, whatever we perceive as danger. And a lot of this fear, I think, is learned. I mean, look at the whole Western states paradigm is built upon the conformity of organized religion that said, "Don't put a foot out of line, or you're literally going to burn in hell forever." Like, what do you mean? Why would you say that to me? I'm a child. I don't know what eternal damnation means. I'm just kind of like using my imagination. It sounds horrific. A lot of our fear ultimately comes back to death, right? Like we have these, like, oh, I fear putting myself out there. Why? What is that fear hiding? Well, a fear that if I put myself out there and they don't like me, then I'll be rejected. I'll be alone, And I'm afraid of being alone because if I'm alone, I don't have community. And without community, people die. They die inside, they die spiritually, physically. It's like, all right, I'm going to go and get this, try this new career. I'm going to go and do it myself. I'm going to figure it out. I'm afraid that it won't work. And if it won't work, I won't have the money. If I won't have the money, I won't have the life. If I don't have the life, it comes back to this fear of mortality. We know that we have this looming end over our existence. One day the light will go out. But we bring that fear because we are not like really cognizant and conscious and aware and accepting of the fact that we will die. That fear of death, that knowing of mortality almost manifests itself in little things. And it's like, we can point out 100 fears. I'm afraid that people won't like me. I'm afraid that I don't have what it takes. I'm afraid that this won't work out. It's like lots of these little fears, but it's really coming from this great thing. If we were not afraid to die, no fear about death, then you're not really afraid to live either. It's like we are afraid to die, and so we get too scared to live. But if we can come to that ultimate acceptance of like, this is temporary, holy moly, this is one day, lights are going to go out, so I'm going to go and live. I'm going to live. I'm going to live. And then to do that, obviously, we're letting go of all of these deeply ingrained, societal projections and expectations. And I think the way that we flow with that is to identify where we've had an expectation, and we can do that by just noticing wherever we've been disappointed and be like, okay, I'm disappointed because there was an expectation there. I'm aware of that expectation now. I can swap that with intention. And Daisy, back to what you were saying about the brain saying that, oh, this is going to be bad. Like this could be bad too. This could be bad to, despite how we felt when we made the decision or how we felt when we decided to, go all in. I think that intention is how we get that brain on our side. It's how we get it to start conspiring for us. I'd be like, we have no expectations. My intention with this move is to grow. My intention is to expand. My intention is to cultivate community. My intention is to discover new parts of myself. And the brain's like, all right, if you say so, I guess that's what we're doing now. You get, in that coherence, that alignment.
So what's interesting about switching expectation, future, something that's in the future, to intention is that intention's right now. It's something you can currently live out. Your intention is something you can do right now. Your expectation is something that you can wish for, but you can do nothing and say, oh, I missed the target because I didn't get to where I needed to be. But I really like this idea of like the way to trick your brain into working with you in this very moment is to have intention, to focus on what am I, and with intention, it's like, it seems more fun. It's more playful. Like there's not all this like heavy weight that is tied to it. Your expectation from your parents, your expectations from society. Like we have all of this carrying all of it. And it's a lot of pressure, like subconsciously, I imagine as well. So yeah, I like that. I like that idea a lot of just having an intention of, if there's no punishment involved with an intention. Like there may be an expectation. And going back to way earlier in the conversation, Cam, when you said, when it comes to finding your purpose, there's kind of like a curiosity involved. And I feel like if anything crushes curiosity, it's expectation, because with expectation comes fear. And if you're in a fear mindset, you're definitely not in a creative, playful mindset, because creativity comes from play. And that's something that I think a lot about, is like the playful state that we are in as kids. Like it's something that I try to tap back into, like this like inner child of like, when you see kids, it's just the most beautiful thing. They're just like enamored with everything, and they're having so much fun because they don't have any expectations put on anything. There's a lot of other things as well, but everyone was once a kid, and everyone still has that kid inside of them. So being able to tap into that play that we all so much want, that really isn't built into modern day society as like a functioning adult. It's like really depleted of play, and like there's so many different ways to do it. I think one of the great spiritual practices, physical practices of yoga, like it allows you to literally just like play on your mat and like really be involved with your body, and like that gets you out of the mind. But play it's just like getting outside. There's something about the weather too, like being in nice weather, like, or like being in like nature, like being able to go for a swim, things that evoke those like childlike blissful experiences. Like I feel like so much of my life I forgot to make that a priority. Um, like when you live in a city, especially, because all you see is the grind, is the productivity, and like you
Mm.
said, you have to honor the transition. Not every moment's going to be productive. Some moments need to be playful, and getting comfortable with that, I think, is an uncomfortable thing. Like when you want to achieve something, when you have this looming light going out of your life, it's like, oh, I have to work hard. I have to work hard. I have to work hard, and it can be really uncomfortable to realize maybe if I soften a little bit, if I have some fun, it's going to recharge me. Kind of like you said, you can only take so much from today. If you take more, you're going to take from tomorrow. And that's a hole you don't want to go down. So so much. I feel like I've gone into a hole in this conversation.
No, that's it's play is fundamental. Like that's it's the intention I go back to most frequently lately. Um, the intention to be the playful participant, the intention to be playfully curious, playfully open, playfully receptive. That like even if I'm kind of feel myself moving towards a state that I don't want to be in, I'll just start like moving around and jumping like I'm just like a little micro play to remind my body, to remind my child that like, yo, you're still here. You got all your uniqueness and all your movements and all your imagination. I forgot to let you come to the surface, and bringing that kid to the surface, recognizing that we can use play to see the humor, the cosmic joke in our own suffering. We can see, it's like you have a really, say you have one of those days and things just keep stacking on and stacking on and stacking on. And finally, at the end of already a bad day, you miss the bus and you just go, okay.
Yeah.
Like it's at some point, it turns into a joke. You're like, what a fucked up day. That's hilarious. And it shifts it all on its head. And we can bring that kind of that cosmic playful humor into what we're doing, like when things start to feel too serious, when I start to take myself too seriously, when I start to take what I'm doing too seriously, it means I'm slipping deeper into the matrix, and I got to bring myself back out with play.
It's almost like when we can recognize. Well, I really like so much what you said about how the fear manifests disproportionately into putting yourself out there, when in reality the fear might be actually death, because everything evolutionary with fear comes back to our survival. And I think when we can comprehend and maybe get comfortable with death, impermanence, in whatever way you will, the ability to play and have fun deepens, because you recognize, hey, what is so serious about this blob of a
Hmm.
universe we live in? Like, what is so serious about this? And I think the goal, maybe again, we started talking about purpose. Maybe the goal of life is just to freaking have fun. Why does it have to be this huge, complicated thing of I need to do this, I need to do that? What if I just like, I love when Alan Watts, with his
Hmm.
humor of just laughing at the way everyone lives, and he's just like, it was a musical and the point was to dance, and it's just like, it's so easy to lose yourself and forget. And a question I kind of want to ask you, I think in the spiritual world, there is this concept of enlightenment, right? There is this concept of reaching enlightenment. And my perspective on enlightenment is that emotions, feelings will always be there. We can learn, we can build a toolbox to help navigate, to help cope. And the more that we use those tools, we learn to recognize and identify with those feelings, to let them pass, to let them be there, to not resist. The less we resist, the faster the ebbs and flows go, and the more we can move on with our day. So, do you think that? What do you think about enlightenment, and how do you think the journey progresses? The more work you do, the more you pay attention. Do you think things get things get a little bit easier because you are not resisting as much? And do you think you could ever get to a point where you are truly at bliss? Because what do you think it really means to be at bliss, and maybe what does it really mean to be happy?
A multi-pronged question with a multi-pronged answer. um, in enlightenment, my views, constantly shift and change, because I have moments in the practice where, because the idea of enlightenment seemed too lofty of a goal and too like almost like egotistical of a journey, I just kind of abandoned it. I just wouldn't think about enlightenment. I just sit down for my practice, my meditation, all of these things. But then over the years, over the months, and then recently, I've had these moments where I'm like, oh shit, dang, this is the enlightenment is a state. It is a state that is not static. It's in flux like everything else is, but that enlightened state, it's something that is ineffable and like defies our conceptual understanding of things because it's transcendent in the sense that we transcend the trivialities of our existence, and at the same time of transcending these original structures, this ego, this sense of argument with the world, of the way that things should be, of how I should be feeling, what I should be doing, transcending those structures, but at the same time being rooted and grounded and connected to what and where and just how. That state of enlightenment that runs this almost like this enlightenment circuit in your mind where there's joy and there's contentment and there's love. I think love is the most enlightening state because once that filter of love is over your perception and you can see love in everything, that is a divine experience. And I'm certainly not at the state where I could just slip into that enlightened state, but I think that it is something repeatable and something that can be learned and practiced. And as we practice moving and shifting and or surrendering into these states, they exist closer and closer to the surface so that they're less of an effort to get to. Your mind is so much more familiarized with them, and the neural pathways that you take to reach those states are just right there. Like we are building pathways, and all of these pathways are connections to ourselves. Like meditation is this process of sitting down to meet myself in its ultimateness, its isness, its suchness, its presence. And then happiness is, that's this, it's another emergent state. It's something that reveals itself when the conditions are appropriate. And so what are those conditions for us? How do we cultivate those conditions? How do we take an active participatory role in this universe and engage in those conditions? Because looking directly at happiness, just like purpose, if we look straight at it, be like, why don't I have you? Where do I find you? We just get our own kind of misery reflected and amplified back at us. Whereas if I go, okay, well, I don't know, but I'm going to do this because this feels good and that feels good and that's curious and that's exciting and that makes me feel love and that makes me feel connected. And out of those cumulative connections and conditions, this thing reveals itself that is this effervescent state of happiness. And it's like if we latch onto it and go, there you are, I want you, it's like, whew, bye. And if we are searching and desperate for it, then it eludes our discovery as well. But if it's just this thing that emerges, then it starts to emerge just through the simple action of engaging in those things. And, it can be invited, invoked, and brought into existence by recognizing that it might already be there. Even in the dark moments, even in the confusing moments, like I can still be happy with that. I can still sit in solace, this peace with everything, peace with it all, despite the discomfort that I feel and the parts of me that want to reject it. It's like I'm at peace with all of that, all of the parts that want to reject and all of the things outside that are triggering these feelings. I maybe there is this unblemished purity of happiness that exists, but it's also the space in which things can occur. It's shifting the perceptive quality of this experience and creating a different character of existence. And that's a journey. That's the path, right? I think that we all are searching for happiness, and I think we should.
Learning to live within the chaos, learning to live within the discomfort, not needing to always ask why, and sometimes just trusting the way things are working out, trusting that you don't always need to know, trusting that that sense of inner peace that you can cultivate will exist regardless of where you are at, regardless of what is happening. It's a state that is fixed because it is our truest state, it is our nature. And I think that connecting to that, finding ways to connect with that, no matter what is going on in your life, maybe that is just what this is all about, just learning
Yeah.
how to
Yeah.
tap into that.
I got to run to my next podcast. I got 2 booked back to back today. But you
Ooh.
two are running a really beautiful podcast, and I'm really excited to see and witness where this all goes. I feel intuitively that this Texas move is going to be just really exciting for you, and just excited to see what comes out of the context of a different pace of life and a different pace of experience.
Thank you, Cam. This was
Awesome.
amazing having you on. Thank you so much for your time. Everything you said was beautifully said, and I need to re-listen to this episode because I I think I was so
I hope it
involved in
made
it
sense.
that I kind of forgot it was happening. No, no. This is my favorite. I love these kinds of conversations. This is all Sophie and I have as conversations. So
All right, I know you got to hop. Thanks so much, Cam, for joining. It was so
Thanks
nice
so
to meet
much.
you.
I'll see you guys next time.